Hi, and welcome to the Men on the Path to Love podcast, the space between relationships, where real growth begins episode. I'm Bill Simpson, your host. I coach men who are rebuilding their lives after a breakup or divorce, helping them understand their relationship patterns, grow into the best version of themselves, and create deeper love and real connection, showing up differently for the next chapter of their lives so they can live the life they love. So, as I continue my series on rebuilding after breakup or divorce, I think this episode might be one of the most important in this series, because this is where everything either changes or it repeats, the same old, same old. And I've found that most men think the goal after breakup or divorce is to move on, right away. But what if the real growth doesn't happen in the next relationship, but in the space before the next relationship? Because here's the truth, man. Some men move on too fast and repeat the same patterns. And I'm certainly guilty of that. And some men stay stuck too long and never risk love again. And I almost went down that path. So the question becomes, what do you do with the space in between relationships? Well, that's what this episode is about. Now, I'm going to bring up the research and attachment theory again because it's so important. It shows that our early and repeated relationship experiences create what's called internal working models. And these models shape how we choose our partners, how we respond to an argument or conflict, and how we interpret love and connection. And here's the key. If you don't take time to reflect after your relationship ends, you don't update that model. You just keep rerunning it over and over again and wondering, how the hell did I get here again? And other research on post-relationship recovery and what's called self-concept clarity after breakups. The self-concept clarity is the extent to which self-beliefs are clearly defined, internally consistent, and stable across time and different situations. And the research shows that people who take intentional time alone develop greater emotional awareness, and they're more likely to form healthier future relationships. And they also experience less anxiety and dependency in the next relationship. And from a neuroscience standpoint, breakups and divorce actually activate the brain similar to withdrawal from addiction. The brain wants that high. So jumping into a new relationship too fast can act as a dopamine boost or substitute, but not true healing. Okay? Now, like I said at the beginning, there are two extremes that men can fall into. The rebounding too fast, as I mentioned in the last episode. And that rebounding is to avoid pain, to get relief, and you end up repeating patterns. And then there is the avoid love altogether extreme. And this is the other side, with the fear of getting hurt again, shutting down emotionally, or convincing yourself you don't need connection, you don't need a relationship. And the thing is, both of these extremes are reactions, not growth. And I know, I've been there, done that. Again, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, there was a time in my life from my teens up to my first marriage where I didn't allow myself any space in between relationships. I would move from one relationship to the next without really being alone. And looking back now, understanding my patterns, it makes complete sense why those relationships didn't last. Because I never gave myself the opportunity to reflect, to reset, get regrounded, or reconnect to who I actually was. And it wasn't until I started doing the work, learning to be okay with myself and learning to be okay alone, that's when everything began to shift. And that path led me to the relationship I have today with my wife. And it's been over 17 years together, and we're still thriving. Now, I want to share a different kind of story. It's about a friend of mine who I'll call Ty, not his real name. Ty was a lot like me in one way. He didn't leave space between relationships until life forced him to. He got engaged to a woman he believed was the one, and then everything changed. She left him for another woman, her best friend. And even though he respected her honesty before having to go through the wedding and all that, it still completely floored him. He felt betrayed, he was angry, he felt confused, and he was really deeply hurt. He questioned everything, wondering how he didn't see it, how he missed the signs. And after that, he just stopped dating completely. He poured himself into his work, his health, and he had this side hustle as a recording engineer. And so time passed. A year went by, and then another. And we had kind of lost touch for a little bit. And one day I ran into him at the grocery store. And I asked him how he was doing. And he was like, I'm good. I asked him if he was seeing anyone. And he was like, nah, man, I've given up on relationships. And when I heard him say that, frankly, it hit me hard because I recognized it, not as strength, but as him protecting himself. And after I left, I just couldn't get him off my mind. And what he told me really concerned me. So the next day, I reached out and took a risk, gave him a call, and I told him of my concern. I shared how at one point I had felt the same way, ready to give up on love and relationship altogether, that I was ready to live a monk's life, And I told him how grateful I was that I didn't. And I suggested that he consider getting some therapy or coaching. And not from me, but because therapy and coaching had helped me. And I told him that I'd hate to see him miss out on what was possible for him. And that's when he admitted to me deep down that he was lonely and that he wanted connection, but he was terrified of getting hurt again. And I understood that. And he actually took my advice and took a step, and he got support. And to make a long story short, I'm just going to say that over time, Ty was able to rebuild his confidence. He got reconnected with himself. And he did get himself back out there, and he found the love that he was looking for. Now, here's the takeaway from Ty's story. Taking that space in between those relationships is very powerful. But too much unintentional space becomes avoidance. And there's a big difference between healing and hiding or avoiding. So what does healthy space in between relationships actually look like? Well, this is where I feel a lot of men need clarity. I sure did. So I'm going to break it down for you. First is to know what healthy space is not. It's not isolating. It's not numbing out. It's not distracting yourself endlessly. And it's not avoiding. And in case you're wondering, some of the signs that you may be avoiding include that whole I'm done with relationships mindset, or staying constantly busy to avoid any feelings that you're having. It's shutting down emotionally, and also being cynical about love or relationships. Now, healthy space is intentional. So here are some signs you're using the space in a healthy way. You're reflecting on your patterns, not just blaming your ex, okay? Looking at yourself, your patterns, How did you get here? You're also processing your emotions instead of stuffing them. You're reconnecting with your identity outside of a relationship. Oftentimes, we identify ourselves as being in that relationship, and it's time to identify yourself outside of that, who you are individually. You're also building emotional awareness. That's hard for a lot of guys, yet that's part of the healing process. You're also taking responsibility and accountability for your role in past dynamics. And it's not taking all the blame, that it's all your fault. It's just owning your part of it, owning your shit. Okay? So when it comes to allowing space in between relationships, the question everyone asks is, how long should I wait? How much space? Well, frankly, it's not about time. It's about readiness. And there is research on this, and research and clinical experience suggests that a few months is often not enough for meaningful reflection after a serious relationship. They're saying more like 6 to 12 months is a more common range for doing that intentional inner healing work. But again, it's about readiness, right? So how do you know when you're ready? Well, you'll know when you're ready when you're no longer driven by relieving your pain, your loneliness, or your fear. You'll know you're ready when you're not looking for someone to fix how you're feeling. And you'll also know you're ready when you can enter a relationship because you choose to, not because you feel like you need to or feel desperate to. Now, I'm going to give you some tips on what to do in between relationships, that space. And guys, here's where the real work happens. Okay? So one thing that's been helpful for me and a lot of my clients is journaling about your patterns. What kept showing up? What were the common denominators in these relationships? And notice the pattern. What did I bring into the relationship? And where did I lose myself? So you can journal with these prompts and see where it takes you. Another thing is to, and as I mentioned earlier, work on your emotional awareness, your EQ, your emotional intelligence. And that means to start by identifying or naming those emotions, what you're feeling. And again, this can be a challenge for a lot of men, but I encourage you to stick with it because it's so important. It's also being aware and understanding your emotional triggers, your memories, your experiences or events that create that strong emotional reaction no matter what your current mood is. All of a sudden everything's cool and then boom, you get triggered and you snap or you react in a way you don't want to. And working with these triggers can be really helpful. And getting therapy or some coaching can really help you with this and how you respond to your triggers. And as I mentioned earlier, it's about rebuilding your identity, who you are outside of a relationship. We often can become attached to our identity as a partner or a husband or identify as a part of a couple. So working on who you are outside a relationship is so important in moving forward. Another thing is to get clear about your values or your standards and what really matters to you. And asking yourself, what kind of partner do I want to be? And the last thing I'll say is to try to maintain a healthy social connection and not social media. No, don't isolate. You want to connect with family, friends, and community. And that can be really helpful as well to get you back in your shoes. And I want to say, I know how challenging it can be to hold that space for yourself as you navigate rebuilding after breakup or divorce. So if you need some help with creating that space, That's the work I do with men. So check out my website, menonthepathtolove.com, for resources, coaching options, and more. That's menonthepathtolove.com. All right, it's about time for my quote of the week, and it comes from author, life coach, and fellow podcaster Jay Shetty. He says, quote, "The longer you wait for the right person, the more you learn to become the right person," unquote. Yeah, man, because the time you spend waiting and rebuilding isn't wasted. It's shaping the man who's finally ready for the relationship he's been asking for. And that's going to bring an end to this episode of the Men on the Path to Love podcast, the Space Between Relationships, Where Real Growth Begins episode. My name is Bill Simpson. I appreciate you listening. Now, in the next episode, I continue my series on rebuilding after breakup or divorce. And I have a question for you to consider. What if the real reason your relationships haven't worked isn't who you chose, but what you were never taught? And that's why a lot of this isn't our fault. So think about that question and join me next time as I break down some key relationship skills that are essential for a healthy, long-lasting relationship that most men were never taught. Don't miss the Skills That Make or Break Relationships That Most Men Never Learn episode. And listen, if this episode was helpful for you or you know someone who needs to hear it, then please share the link to this podcast and share the love. And until next time, keep your heart open and stay on the path to love.